Hi everybody. So for my first review in a long time, I am going to be reviewing Call of Cthulhu, the role-playing game by Chaosium. This version of Call of Cthulhu actually uses the basic role-playing system, or BRP, trademark of Chaosium. This is the original set of rules that the Call of Cthulhu RPG used when it was first published back in 1981. This isn't the first edition of the core rulebook, this is actually the 5th edition, but the rules have been virtually unchanged since the first edition, though some corrections and updates and that sort of thing. I'll get more into the additions a little later on in my review. So what is Call of Cthulhu? Call of Cthulhu is a role-playing game, a horror role-playing game that aims itself at, more specifically at psychological horror, though you can play it a number of different ways. But it's based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft, a horror and fantasy author during the 1920s and 30s, who published a number of short stories for pulp magazines of the time. And one particular set of stories, which had interrelated themes and concepts, became later referred to as the Cthulhu mythos. Cthulhu being a reference to the most popular of the entities of this series of stories. The Cthulhu mythos is essentially it dwells on one of H.P. Lovecraft's most famous concepts, and one of his most famous quotes is that the oldest and most powerful of human emotions is fear, and the oldest and most powerful type of fear is fear of the unknown. I think I'm misquoting that just slightly, but you get the basic idea. His concept was that, for the Cthulhu mythos, was that humanity, as humans, we like to think ourselves the center of the universe. We like to think of ourselves as being so important in the grand scheme of things. And his ideas were that there are forces at work in the universe that are so ancient and so powerful that we are the most infinitesimally tiny pinprick in their reality, and that they could entirely obliterate us, at a whim, and not even notice the entirety of our existence. So Call of Cthulhu then is a role-playing game about where the players play, generally speaking, normal people who encounter the elements of the mythos. I'm going to read a very quick excerpt from Lovecraft's most famous story, The Call of Cthulhu, which kind of sets up what Call of Cthulhu role-playing is, well, what the Cthulhu mythos is sort of about, and thus how the role-playing game is played. This goes: "The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little, but some day the piecing together of the disassociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality, and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation, or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age." That's driving home the idea that the elements of this mythos are so great, so ancient, so powerful, that they defy mankind's notions of reality. They exist beyond our capability to understand them, and thus experiencing those elements of the mythos ultimately leads people, those people who are exposed to it, into insanity. Your mind shuts down when it recognizes that everything that it thought was real and true has been completely shattered. So, Call of Cthulhu, the basic rules for the game are, for this version of the game, are very simple. The basic role-playing system is a percentile-based system that where you have a handful of attributes, and then you have a big list of skills, and the skills are sort of the primary way that your character interacts with the game world, and they're rated on a percentile system, or on a percentile scale, so that, say you have a skill like library use, and your library use skill might be rated 50%. So you would roll percentile dice whenever you were required to test that skill, and you want to roll equal to or less than the percentile rating of your skill to succeed. If you roll higher, you fail at the skill. And that's basically it. It's a very simple system. Characters have also a sanity score, and this is very central to the Call of Cthulhu game experience. And your sanity is similarly rated on a percentile scale, and you roll percentile dice whenever you encounter something disturbing or elements of the mythos. It doesn't have to be elements of the mythos, but anything that would really frighten or disturb your character, including opening a closet and seeing a dead body hanging there, that sort of thing. Anything that would disturb a normal person to experience. And so there's a mechanic there that tells you, that helps define for you your character's gradual slide into insanity as he gets exposed to these horrific elements. So Call of Cthulhu, generally speaking, is played where the main characters are investigators, whether willingly or not. They discover these certain mysteries. They discover unexplained phenomena, or they hear about events, and then they, because of their own natural curiosity, or maybe their own jobs, or whatever motives are compelling them to do so, they go to investigate deeper. They go to learn the truth behind the things that they're hearing about, or behind the things that they're seeing, and in doing so, they are exposed to these ancient and powerful kind of cosmic realities, and as a consequence, they tend to be driven insane. There's really only two ways that a Call of Cthulhu game or a Call of Cthulhu character really kind of meets an end, unlike other games where you might go on to vast wealth and power and fame and reputation. In Call of Cthulhu, generally your characters either end up dead, or they go insane and spend time in a padded cell. Now a lot of people view this as a very nihilistic game. In some ways it is, because there's the elements of the mythos are so great. Mankind is so insignificant compared to these vast truths that are out there, that there's really no way to combat them. This isn't a game like D&D where you walk into a room, and then there's a horrible tentacled monster, and you pull out your shotgun and you shoot him down. That really isn't an option in Call of Cthulhu. Now granted, in Call of Cthulhu can be played several different ways, but the important thing to remember too is that not only are the characters necessarily dealing with the actual creatures of the mythos, the ancient gods, and their servants, but it also revolves around the cults that worship these ancient entities, which are things that the characters can combat. The characters can actually, when they encounter these cults, they can try to put an end to their vile doings and that sort of thing. So there is a heroism in Call of Cthulhu. There's a very significant heroism, in my opinion, because the heroes in Call of Cthulhu are sort of like the man who stood before the tanks in Tiananmen Square, looking squarely into the face of their own oblivion, and yet unwilling to yield for the concept that they can preserve the safety of the rest of humanity, even if for just one day longer. That's kind of the struggle in Call of Cthulhu. The heroism in Call of Cthulhu is kind of a self-sacrifice, that you recognize that by throwing yourself up against these impossible odds, you could be killed or you could be driven insane, and yet you do it because to not do it would basically doom the rest of humanity. And so, you know, there, of course, Call of Cthulhu can be played in different ways, and there are several different eras and you know, campaign settings and that sort of thing that have put different spins on Cthulhu and can give a different flavor to the way the game is played. I'll talk about those more in just a second when I come back with my second part.